The morning of her wedding dawned bright and golden, sunlight pouring across the fields and spilling into the small churchyard. Bells rang softly in the distance, and neighbors bustled about, eager for the spectacle. It was supposed to be her happiest day, the one she had prayed for during long nights when she doubted if anyone would ever see her as more than the big girl. She had always been strong, always kind, but in a world where slenderness was praised, her fuller figure became a source of whispered jokes and cruel laughter. Still, today promised to silence those voices. Today, she would finally walk down the aisle. Her mother wept as she adjusted the lace veil, and her sisters whispered about how grand she looked. The gown hugged her frame tightly, but she wore it proudly. Her cheeks flushed with nervous excitement as she thought of the vows to come, of the promises her groom had made to her in hushed conversations beneath the oak tree where he had first proposed. He had told her she was beautiful. He had told her she was enough. She clung to those words as though they were lifelines. The pews filled quickly with townsfolk. Some came out of genuine fondness for her, but others arrived out of curiosity, waiting for a chance to smirk and nudge at each other. "How odd," one woman whispered, "that a man like him would marry a girl like her." Another snickered quietly. "He must be desperate." Their words did not reach her ears, but their intentions lingered like a storm cloud over the gathering. She stood in the small anteroom of the church, clutching her bouquet so tightly the stems nearly snapped. The minister peeked in, smiling warmly. "Are you ready, child?" he asked. She nodded, though her heart beat furiously in her chest. She was ready. She had been ready all her life, but minutes passed. Then more. A hush fell over the pews as people began to murmur. The groom had not yet arrived. Her father shifted uncomfortably, glancing out the window. The best man was nowhere to be seen. The minister's smile faltered. She tried to stay calm, whispering to herself that perhaps he had been delayed, that maybe his horse had stumbled, or that some urgent matter held him briefly back. Surely he would come. He had to come. The whispers grew louder, crueler, until at last a breathless boy burst into the room with a folded note in his hand. He handed it to her father, who read it in stunned silence. The paper trembled in his fingers before he passed it on to her. She unfolded it with shaking hands, and her eyes blurred as the words leapt at her. "I cannot go through with this. I'm sorry. She's too big, and I cannot face a life like this." The bouquet slipped from her fingers and scattered across the wooden floor. Gasps rippled through the church. Someone laughed sharp, mocking, and others muttered that they had seen it coming. Her chest tightened, as if all the air had been ripped from her lungs. Shame flooded her veins hotter than fire. She wanted to run, to disappear, but her legs would not move. The veil that had felt so heavy with promise now felt like chains in that moment. She realized every cruel whisper had been right in their eyes. Her groom had confirmed it publicly, humiliating her beyond repair. She turned her face away, tears streaking down her cheeks, wishing desperately that she could sink into the earth beneath her. Her wedding day, which was supposed to mark the beginning of her new life, had ended before it could even begin, leaving her abandoned, broken, and certain that no one would ever choose her. The days following the broken wedding blurred together in a haze of humiliation. She barely remembered how she made it home that afternoon. Her sisters had tried to comfort her, whispering that she was still beautiful, still worthy, but the words slid past her like rain against a stone wall. Nothing could drown out the echo of that cruel note. The ink burned into her memory. She's too big. Everywhere she went, she felt the weight of eyes on her. The small town was merciless with its gossip. Women whispered behind fans, men chuckled over pints at the tavern, and children repeated words they did not even understand. She stopped going to church, too ashamed to sit in the pews where she had once waited for her vows. Even the kindly minister, who had looked at her with pity rather than scorn, became a reminder of her deepest wound. Her mother worried, urging her to eat, urging her to step out into the sunlight, but she often remained inside, curled by the window where no one could see her. She asked herself over and over again if she had been foolish to believe she deserved happiness. Maybe she had. Maybe the world was right, maybe women like her weren't meant to be chosen. But life, as it always did, went on around her. One morning she walked down to the market at dawn, hoping the early hour would spare her from too many glances. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of baked bread and fresh hay. She pulled her shawl tight and kept her eyes low as she bartered for flour. It was then she noticed him. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and sun-worn, dressed in the dusty clothes of someone who worked the land rather than polished boots in town. He stood near the horse trough, speaking gently to a child perched on the edge of the wagon. She thought little of it until she felt his eyes linger. Not mocking, not cruel, just watchful, curious. She looked away quickly, certain she was imagining it. The second time she saw him was at the well, days later. She struggled with a heavy bucket, her arms trembling from the effort, when suddenly a strong hand steadied the rope. She startled and looked up into the same steady gaze. "Let me help you," he said, his voice low but kind. She flushed, shaking her head. "I can manage," but he didn't step back. Instead, he lifted the bucket as though it weighed nothing, setting it gently at her feet. "Sometimes," he said, "we don't have to." Her breath caught. No man had ever spoken to her like that, not with condescension, not with pity, but with simple respect. Before she could thank him, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her with her pulse racing and her thoughts spinning. In the weeks that followed, their paths crossed again and again at the market, on the road, once even outside her own gate as he delivered supplies for her father. Each time, he greeted her with quiet courtesy, never once mentioning the cruel incident everyone else in town whispered about. If anything, he seemed blind to her shame, as though he saw something entirely different when he looked at her. It unsettled her. It frightened her. But beneath all that, it sparked something she thought had died on her wedding day: hope. At first, she tried to ignore the strange flutter in her chest whenever she saw him. She told herself it was nothing, just gratitude for his kindness at the well, a passing awareness of someone who hadn't joined the town in ridiculing her. But the more their paths crossed, the harder it became to deny the quiet warmth that stirred within her. She learned his name from a neighbor, Daniel Hart, a rancher who had moved back after years away to care for his aging father's land. Unlike many men in town, Daniel didn't seem concerned with gossip or appearances. He worked hard, kept to himself, and when he did speak, his words carried the weight of honesty. One afternoon, she found herself at the mercantile, arms full of supplies. Balancing them awkwardly, she nearly dropped a sack of sugar. A strong hand steadied it before it tumbled, and she looked up to find Daniel standing beside her once again. "You've a talent for carrying too much at once," he teased gently, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Her cheeks burned. "I suppose I do. Let me walk you home," he said. "It's no trouble." She hesitated, torn between the instinct to shield herself from more gossip and the undeniable safety she felt in his presence. Against her better judgment, she nodded. The walk was quiet at first. She focused on the crunch of gravel beneath their boots, the weight of the supplies in her arms, and the thundering of her heart. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I was sorry to hear what happened," he said softly. Her chest tightened. She had dreaded those words, the pity, the reminder of her humiliation. She opened her mouth to cut him off, but he continued before she could. "Not sorry for you," he clarified. "Sorry for him. Any man who'd leave a woman standing like that doesn't deserve her." "Doesn't deserve you," she froze mid-step, blinking up at him. No one had spoken of it like that before. To everyone else, she had been the foolish girl left behind, the one too big to keep. Yet Daniel's tone carried no mockery, no pity, only conviction. "You don't know me well enough to say that," she whispered, struggling to hold his gaze. "I know enough," he said simply. His words stayed with her long after they parted at her gate. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she thought about the way his eyes had softened when he looked at her. Not dismissive, not ashamed, just steady. Over the next weeks, Daniel seemed to find excuses to see her. Sometimes he brought fresh produce from his ranch, saying he had extra. Other times, he lingered in town until he could walk her home. He never pushed, never demanded, simply offered his company like a gift she was free to accept or refuse. Slowly, she found herself opening up. She laughed at his dry humor, asked about his ranch, even teased him when he spoke too seriously about cattle. In turn, he listened to her stories about her sisters, her mother's stubbornness, the way she used to climb trees as a girl despite being told she was too heavy. For the first time in her life, sharing those memories didn't sting, but even as their bond deepened, fear tugged at her. She couldn't forget the humiliation of her wedding day. She couldn't silence the voice that whispered, "What if he changes his mind too? What if he looks at you one day and sees what the others see?" One evening, standing at the gate as Daniel tipped his hat and turned to leave, she caught herself wishing fiercely, desperately, that he would stay, that he would choose her, and the very thought terrified her. The turning point came on a windy autumn afternoon. She had gone into town with her sister, hoping to keep her head down and finish her errands quickly, but whispers still followed her wherever she walked. Some people had grown tired of the story, but others delighted in retelling it. As if her pain were a form of entertainment. At the bakery, two women stood behind her, speaking in hushed voices that were meant to be overheard. "Poor thing," one of them said. "Imagine being left like that. A man can't be blamed for not wanting to spend his life with someone her size." "She should have known better," the other replied. "Dreams above her station, that's all it was." Her cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes fixed on the loaves in front of her, forcing her hands to stay steady. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. But before she could pay, a familiar voice cut through the air. "Funny," Daniel said from behind, his tone sharp as flint. "I've seen plenty of men with slim wives who couldn't carry half the strength she does. Bread doesn't rise on thin air, and homes don't stand without women who know how to keep them." The bakery went silent. The two women stiffened, their eyes wide. Daniel stepped forward, his gaze steady as he looked at them. "If you've nothing kind to say about her, keep your mouths shut." Heat rushed to her face, not from shame this time, but from the sudden, overwhelming force of his defense. No one had ever spoken for her like that. She wanted to vanish and yet stand taller all at once. After the women scurried off, Daniel turned to her, his expression softening. "Don't listen to them," he said gently. "They've no idea of your worth." Her throat tightened. She managed a small nod, unable to trust her voice. That moment lingered with her long after they left the shop. For days she replayed it in her mind, his fierce words, the protective way he had stood by her side. It was more than kindness. It was more than courtesy. It was something else, something deeper. A week later, Daniel appeared at her family's home with a basket of apples from his orchard. Her mother welcomed him warmly, ushering him inside. He stayed through supper, sharing stories about his ranch, his father, and the long years he had spent traveling. She watched him laugh with her family, so at ease, as though he belonged there. Later, when the house quieted and her sisters busied themselves with chores, Daniel asked if she might walk with him outside. The evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of hay and wood smoke. They strolled in silence for a while, the sky painted with streaks of orange and violet. Finally, he spoke. "I don't care what they say about you. I've seen the way you hold yourself after everything that's happened. That takes courage. More than most men I've met." her breath caught. She wanted to believe him, but doubt twisted inside her. Courage doesn't make me any less. Me. She gestured vaguely at her figure, the very thing that had condemned her in the eyes of so many. Daniel stopped walking. No, he said firmly. And that's exactly why I admire you. You are who you are, and there's nothing wrong with it. His words sank into her like sunlight breaking through clouds. She searched his face for mockery, but found only sincerity. His eyes held her as if he saw every scar, every fear, and still wanted to look closer. That night, as she lay awake, she realized something had shifted. Daniel was no longer just the kind rancher who helped her with buckets and walked her home. He was a man who had seen her at her lowest, defended her in front of others, and looked at her as though she was not only enough but more than enough. And for the first time since her wedding day, she wondered if perhaps she could let herself believe in love again. The weeks that followed carried a gentler rhythm than she had known in a long time. Where once she had hidden inside, ashamed to show her face in town, now she found herself walking with Daniel, on quiet evenings or sharing simple conversations over baskets of apples or fresh bread. At first, she told herself it was nothing, that he was simply kind, that he pitied her after all she had endured. But the more she tried to believe that, the less it fit with the way he looked at her. His eyes held no pity, no mockery, no hidden amusement. When Daniel looked at her, she felt seen, as if every wall she had built was invisible to him. One afternoon, she visited the market alone. The sun was high, and though the town bustled with activity, she felt strangely at ease. As she sorted through jars of preserves, a familiar shadow fell across her shoulder. "You always choose the strawberry ones," Daniel remarked. His voice warm with amusement. She turned, startled, to see him grinning faintly. "And how would you know that?" she asked, unable to stop the smile tugging at her lips. "Because I've carried them for you more than once," he said simply. She laughed, a sound that felt strange and freeing after so many months of silence. The shopkeeper raised his brows at the sight of her laughing with a man with him. But instead of shrinking beneath the stares, she straightened her shoulders. For once, she didn't care. Later, as they walked back toward her home, Daniel slowed his steps. "You've been smiling more lately," he said. She looked down at her hands, suddenly shy. "I suppose I have." "It suits you," he added softly. Her heart gave a sharp, unfamiliar tug. Compliments had always been followed by backhanded remarks, the kind that left her feeling smaller than before. But Daniel's words carried no sharp edges, just quiet sincerity that reached places inside her she thought had withered away. That evening, she sat by her window long after sunset, replaying the moment. The way his voice softened when he spoke to her, the way his smile reached his eyes, it all left her restless, nervous, yet undeniably hopeful. She found herself tracing the rim of her teacup and whispering into the dark, could he truly mean it? Her doubts still lingered, stubborn as weeds. She remembered the note her groom had left, the cruel words etched forever into her heart. "She's too big." Every time Daniel looked at her with affection, those words tried to creep in, whispering that he would leave too, that no one could ever stay. But Daniel didn't leave. The next morning, he appeared at her family's door with a bundle of firewood. "Thought you could use some before the cold sets in," he said. Her mother welcomed him inside, fussing over tea and biscuits while her sisters exchanged knowing looks. After supper, as the fire crackled low, Daniel leaned closer to her. "Would you walk with me a while?" Outside, the night was calm, stars scattered like spilled diamonds. The air carried a bite of chill, and she wrapped her shawl tighter. They walked slowly, their steps crunching softly against the earth. "You've been through more than most could bear," Daniel said at last. "But you're still standing. You're still smiling. That's something I admire." Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Why do you say such things?" she whispered. Do you not see me? Do you not see what they all see? Daniel stopped walking. He reached out, gently brushing a stray curl from her face. I see you, he said firmly. Not the whispers. Not the cruel words. Just you. And I like what I see. Her breath caught. For a moment, the world seemed to still the stars above, the earth beneath, even her own heart as it threatened to break open. She realized then that she was beginning to trust him. Slowly, tentatively, she was letting her guard down. And with it came something she had thought lost forever, hope that love might truly be within her reach. It didn't take long before the town began to notice. At first, it was little things, the way Daniel carried her basket at the market, the way he walked beside her down the main road, the way his steady presence seemed to silence the cruel whispers that once trailed after her. But soon, his attention became impossible to ignore. The butcher's wife whispered it first. Have you seen how often Daniel Hart looks at her? Like she's the only woman in town. By the week's end, the entire market was buzzing with speculation. Some said he was only being kind. Others scoffed that he'd come to his senses soon enough. A few muttered that he was lonely, that he needed a woman to keep his ranch, and she was desperate enough to accept. She heard all of it. She tried not to, but words have a way of finding their mark. Every comment scraped against her fragile confidence, reopening the wound she had fought to heal. One afternoon, she confronted Daniel as they walked by the riverbank, the water glimmering in the fading light. Do you hear what they say about us? She asked, her voice tight. Daniel glanced at her, his brow furrowed. I hear enough, he said evenly. They think you pity me. That you only keep company with me because no one else would. Her voice broke despite her best efforts. And maybe they're right. Maybe I'm nothing but a burden to you. Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Is that what you think? She dropped her gaze to the ground, ashamed of the tears threatening her eyes. It's what I fear. He was silent for a long moment. Then, gently, he lifted her chin until her eyes met his. I don't care what they say, he said firmly. I know what I feel. And it has nothing to do with pity. Her breath caught. Then what is it? His lips curved into the faintest smile. Respect, admiration, and something more I don't plan on hiding. Before she could answer, footsteps crunched along the path. A pair of townsfolk passed by, staring openly at the two of them standing so close together. She stiffened, ready for the whispers, but Daniel reached for her hand without hesitation. His fingers warm and strong around hers. The townsfolk's eyes widened, and one of them muttered something under his breath. But Daniel didn't flinch. He held her hand all the way back to her home, as if daring anyone to speak against it. That night, as she sat at her window, she replayed the moment over and over, the feel of his hand in hers, the steady conviction in his voice. Daniel was not a man easily swayed by gossip. When he made a choice, he stood by it. And he was choosing her, openly and without shame. The next Sunday, he came to church for the first time in months. When the service ended, he walked straight to her pew and offered her his arm in front of everyone. Gasps rippled through the congregation, but he ignored them, his calm expression never faltering. As they walked out together, she felt dozens of eyes on her, but for once she did not shrink beneath them. Instead, she lifted her chin and let herself lean into Daniel's strength. It was clear now, Daniel's intentions were not fleeting, nor were they hidden. He wanted her to know. He wanted everyone to know. For the first time since her wedding day, she felt the beginnings of something she had thought lost forever, pride in being exactly who she was. For all of Daniel's steadiness, for all his words of reassurance, her fears still clung like shadows that would not be shaken. Each time he smiled at her, her heart lifted, but just as quickly, doubt whispered its poison. What if he grows tired of you? What if he wakes one morning and sees you as they do, too much, not enough, unworthy. It all came to a head one evening when Daniel invited her to supper at his ranch. His home was modest but warm, the walls lined with his late mother's quilts and the faint smell of wood smoke lingering in the air. He had cooked a simple meal: roasted chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread, and as they ate, laughter filled the spaces between them. For a while, she let herself believe this was what life could be: simple, steady, safe. But then, as she helped clear the dishes, her sleeve brushed the edge of the table and a cup slipped to the floor, shattering. She gasped, mortified, stooping to gather the shards. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I'm always clumsy." Daniel knelt beside her, catching her wrist gently before she cut herself. "It's just a cup," he said softly. "It doesn't matter." But she pulled back, her voice sharper than she intended. "It does matter. Everything I do seems to be too much, too heavy, too clumsy too." She broke off, her throat tight. "I can't pretend you won't see it one day." Daniel's brow furrowed, his expression shifting from concern to something deeper. "Is that what you think?" he asked quietly. "That I'm just waiting to see you the way they do?" She swallowed hard, unable to meet his gaze. "Why wouldn't you? Everyone else has." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire in the hearth. Then Daniel reached across the broken pieces of glass, his hand warm and steady as he covered hers. "I don't care what they say," he told her firmly. "I don't see you as too much of anything. You've been carrying their cruelty for so long that you can't imagine a world where it's not true. But I'm telling you now, it's not. Not for me." Tears burned in her eyes, but fear still pressed hard against her chest. "And if you change your mind?" she whispered. "If one day you wake up and realize," he cut her off, his voice low but certain, "then I'll wake up and tell you again what I've told you from the start. I choose you. Every day. For as long as you'll let me." Her breath caught, the truth of his words crashing against the walls she had built around her heart. She wanted to believe him. Oh, how desperately she wanted to. But believing meant risking everything, risking another abandonment, another humiliation. Daniel seemed to sense her struggle. He didn't press further. Instead, he helped her to her feet, carefully sweeping aside the broken glass. Then, as if nothing had shattered at all, he asked her to sit by the fire. He poured her tea, spoke of his orchard, and told her stories about the long journeys he'd once taken. It was his way of reminding her he wasn't going anywhere. Later, as she walked home beneath the stars, her heart warred with itself, fear on one side, hope on the other. She had seen enough of Daniel's devotion to know it was real. Yet trusting it, fully surrendering to it, still felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. But one thing had changed. For the first time, she wasn't standing there alone. Daniel was at her side, steady and patient, waiting for her to take the leap. The days grew longer as spring slipped into summer. And with each passing week, Daniel found more ways to weave himself quietly into her life. He never pushed, never demanded, only offered an arm to steady her when the road grew rough, a hand with the heavier baskets at market, a smile that lingered like sunlight long after he was gone. Still, her doubts lingered, a constant hum beneath the peace he brought. She had spent so many years bracing for rejection that lowering her guard felt like tempting fate. And yet, piece by piece, Daniel was dismantling the walls she had built. One morning, her neighbor came to her door in a rush, her face pale with worry. "The calf's gotten loose again," the woman cried. "My boys can't catch it, and it's headed for the creek." Without thinking, she hurried across the fields, her skirts hiked in one hand. By the time she reached the pasture, she was breathless, her heart pounding. The calf darted wildly, the neighbor's children chasing helplessly. And then Daniel appeared. She hadn't even known he was near, but there he was, striding across the grass with a rope in hand. His movements were calm, measured, and within minutes, the calf was caught and soothed, its wild panic melting beneath his steady voice. The children cheered. The neighbor showered him with thanks, and all the while he looked not at them but at her. His eyes held hers as though he wanted her to see not his strength, not his skill, but his constancy. Later, as they walked back together, she said softly, "You always seem to arrive when I need you most." Daniel smiled, a small curve of his lips. "Maybe that's because I want to be where you are." Her heart stumbled. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them, simple and unadorned, as though it were the plainest truth in the world. That night, she sat by her window long after the house had gone quiet. The stars wheeled overhead, distant and eternal, and she thought of all the years she had spent believing no one would ever stand by her side. Yet here was Daniel, proving her wrong at every turn. The next day, she took a small step of her own. She baked a loaf of bread, her best recipe, soft and golden, and carried it to his ranch. Her hands trembled as she knocked on his door, but when he opened it, his face lit with surprise and something warmer. "For me?" he asked. She nodded, unable to find her voice. Daniel took the loaf, cradling it as though it were some priceless treasure. Then, instead of teasing or thanking her in jest, he said quietly, "This means more than you know." And in that moment, she realized he understood. He knew the risk it took for her to reach out, to offer a piece of herself. However small. It was the first time she felt the ground beneath her shifting from fear toward trust, from doubt toward belief. Daniel wasn't just saying he chose her. He was proving it, day after day, in ways large and small. For the first time since her wedding day had crumbled into dust, she allowed herself to imagine a different ending, one where she wasn't left behind, one where someone stood with her, not in spite of who she was, but because of it. And though she didn't yet say the words aloud, a quiet seed of faith had taken root in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, she could choose him too. Summer brought with it the annual harvest fair, the one event where the entire town gathered, farmers, merchants, families, and travelers passing through. Stalls brimmed with baked goods and preserves, ribbons were awarded to livestock, and musicians filled the air with fiddles and laughter. It was also, unfortunately, a breeding ground for gossip. She hadn't planned to attend. Crowds still made her chest tighten, every laugh in the distance sounding like it might be at her expense. But her younger sister begged her to come, promising it would do her good to walk among the stalls and smell the roasted corn and sugared apples. At first, she lingered on the edges, keeping her shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders. She tried not to notice the sidelong glances, the murmurs she was certain followed her. But when she turned a corner, she nearly collided with Daniel. His face lit up as though seeing her was the best part of his day. "You came," he said simply. "I only for a little while," she murmured. Daniel didn't press. Instead, he offered his arm. "Walk with me?" Against her better judgment, she slipped her hand through his elbow. The warmth of him steadied her, though her heart pounded with every step they took together down the bustling row of stalls. She could feel the eyes of the townsfolk, the way whispers rose like wind through wheat. And then it happened. A group of young men-boys, really, but cruel in their youth, snickered as they passed. One called out just loud enough to carry, "Careful there, Daniel. She'll crush you if you're not watching." Her entire body froze. The air left her lungs, and humiliation burned her skin. She tried to pull her arm free, desperate to flee before tears betrayed her, but Daniel didn't let go. Instead, he stopped in his tracks. The fair went quiet around them as he turned to face the boys. His voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the crowd. "Say another word about her," he said, "and you'll answer to me." The boys shifted uncomfortably, their laughter faltering under the steel in his gaze. One muttered something and they slunk away. Suddenly far less bold. She stood trembling, unable to believe what had just happened. Men had defended her before, but always in pity, always in whispers when it was too late to stop the sting of the insult. No one had ever stood beside her publicly, firmly, without hesitation. Daniel turned to her then, his expression softening. He didn't care about the gawking eyes around them. He took her hand, right there in the middle of the fair, and held it as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "She's the finest woman I know," he said, his voice loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "And I'd be proud if she'd walk with me anywhere." A hush fell, broken only by the fiddle playing faintly in the distance. She stared at him, her breath caught between disbelief and something far sweeter. His hand was warm around hers, unshaken by the silence pressing in from every side. Slowly, she found her voice. "Daniel, everyone's watching," she whispered. "Good," he replied with a small, steady smile. "Let them." And for the first time in her life, the eyes of the town didn't make her feel small. With Daniel at her side, she felt seen. Not as a subject of ridicule, not as a woman abandoned, but as someone worth choosing. When the music picked up again, he guided her forward, and she let him. Her shame hadn't vanished, but it had cracked, and through the crack came something fierce and new, the courage to stand with him, no matter who was watching. The harvest fair had changed something. Where once she shrank from the world, now she felt a quiet strength in knowing Daniel had stood before everyone and claimed her with pride. But even so, a question still lingered in her chest like a stubborn ache. Could she truly let herself believe? Days passed, and Daniel didn't waver. He visited often, bringing apples from his orchard or stories from his fields. He never pressed her for words she wasn't ready to speak, but each time he left, she found herself wishing he would stay just a little longer. Then one golden evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of rose and amber, he asked her to walk with him. She agreed, her heart fluttering as they strolled through the quiet lanes leading out of town. They reached a hill overlooking the fields, where wildflowers swayed in the breeze. Daniel stopped there, turning to face her fully. His eyes were steady, his jaw set with a kind of determination she hadn't seen before. "I need to say this plain," he began, his voice rough with sincerity. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were different. Not because of what others see, but because you carry more kindness, more strength, more beauty than they'll ever understand. And I want you to know I'm not going anywhere. I don't care about their whispers. I care about you." Her throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. "Daniel, you don't understand. I was left once, humiliated. I can't bear to—" He stepped closer, gently taking her hands in his. "I know, and I'll spend as long as it takes proving I'm not that man. I'm not leaving you, not today, not ever." The words broke something open inside her. All the years of doubt, the shame she had carried like a heavy cloak, the cruel voices that had told her she was unworthy, they seemed to scatter into the wind. She searched his face, and what she saw there was not pity. It was devotion. It was choice. Slowly, almost fearfully, she whispered, "Then, I choose you too." Daniel's smile spread, warm and sure, and he pulled her into his arms. For the first time, she let herself rest there fully, no holding back. No fear of being too much. The setting sun bathed them in golden light, and for the first time since her wedding day, she felt truly free. Not because someone had chosen her, but because she had chosen herself, her worth, her right to be loved, her right to stand tall. When they returned to town hand in hand, people looked again, as they always did. But she walked taller now, her chin lifted, because she finally understood. Their whispers no longer defined her. Daniel glanced at her, pride shining in his eyes. and she realized that the life she thought had ended on that cruel day at the altar was only just beginning. In the days and years that followed, she would still hear whispers, still face those who couldn't see past their own smallness. But with Daniel beside her, the voices no longer held power. Together, they built a life of laughter, work, and quiet joy, a life she had once believed impossible. And whenever she looked at him, she remembered the moment he stood in the middle of the harvest fair, unshaken and proud, and she knew she was never too much. Never unworthy. She was, at last, exactly enough.